Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Friends of Biona Wetlands presentation about the state of California's plan to restore the Biona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. I'm Scott Culbertson, Executive Director of the Friends of Biona Wetlands. I'm gonna kind of stall here just for a second while the last few people show up. We've got a packed house, so much so that we had to buy a bigger subscription to our broadcast service. So we're really excited to have everyone here. So the good news, everyone, is the environmental impact, the impact report, the EIR, was certified at the end of last year, which means that the project is approved, that the EIR is approved, pardon me, and that a project was identified, and we're going to present that project today. I want to be really clear that the restoration plan was prepared by and will be implemented by California Department of Fish and Wildlife. The Friends are not involved with the project other than support and advocate for the restoration, like our partners Heal the Bay, Surfrider Foundation, Trust for Public Land, and many others. I'd like to thank Richard Brody, who goes by Brody, for joining us this evening to answer questions. Brody is land manager of the Biona Wetlands Ecological Reserve for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Brody was a major contributor to the plan, and he continues to be actively involved in pushing the project forward. Brody is having technical difficulties today, so we're not going to be able to see him, but we'll be able to hear him when the time comes. So that's where we are. For those of you who don't know much about the Friends of Biona Wetlands, as soon as we're open, we really hope that you'll come visit us at the Ecological Reserve. The Friends were founded in 1978 to preserve and protect the wetlands and to advocate for the next generation of environmental stewards. Our founder, Ruth Lansford, sued the developers to save Biona and won. As many of you know, there were folks who wanted to develop this land. Today, the Friends, along with Audubon, the Bay Foundation, have permits issued by CDFW to operate programming in the Ecological Reserve. The Friends Explore Biona education program teaches thousands of students from all over Los Angeles about the watershed, and our restoration program protects and preserves and restores native habitat for wildlife. You probably know that one of our greatest achievements is bringing back the federally endangered El Segundo blue butterfly to Biona. If you'd like to know more about the Friends and keep an eye on when we're going to be open again so that you can visit, please visit our website, bionafriends.org. The restoration is a complex issue, and our presentation is fairly long. Our objective is to get through the presentation within an hour and answer as many of your questions as possible, and we'll take all of your questions at the end. Little housekeeping here. You'll see a control panel that should be on the right side of your screen. You can use the questions feature to enter your questions. In the interest of time, we're going to aggregate all your questions and answer them at the end. There are some in the handouts on that section on that dashboard. Some of your questions may be answered as we're going along. Well, let's get started. And I'd like to introduce Nessa Frechette. She's the manager of scientific programs at Friends of Biona Wetlands and our field biologist. She's going to give you a lot of good information here, and at the end, we'll go through your questions. So Nessa, take it away, and I look forward to seeing everyone shortly.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks again so much, everyone, for coming today and taking time out of your busy schedules to spend an hour with us. First, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I joined Friends of Biona Wetlands about 6 years ago, shortly after completing my undergraduate degree at UC Davis. And that's really where my love of wetlands and birds was truly solidified. I knew since I was in middle school that I wanted to help save endangered species, and I grew up in the cement jungle of the San Fernando Valley, and my family didn't really spend a lot of time in parks or camping. So I didn't know what our state really had to offer in terms of nature until I visited Central and Northern California. So when I was at Davis and I really got to see all of this, all of our expensive wetlands, our floodplains, our forests, these areas really opened up my eyes to what we were missing out on here in Los Angeles. And after leaving UC Davis, rather than staying up north, where it probably would have been easier to find an environmental job, I decided to come back home and work to create habitat here in LA because I think we deserve it. I, like most people, had no idea that Biona existed, and it was a dream come true joining this organization and fighting every day to restore the wetlands and protect sensitive wildlife. So I also decided to further my education, and while researching nesting wetland birds at the Ballona freshwater marsh, I completed a Master of Natural Resources with an emphasis in wildlife management, and that allows me to further assist Friends of Biona Wetlands in its mission to restore and protect Biona and create a highly functioning estuary for the people and the wildlife of Los Angeles. So thank you for taking the time to hear our story and to learn more about Biona. So here I've shared my screen. Make sure to, if you can't see it, you can expand the window just by dragging it. We've had some issues with that. So just go ahead and play with the screen if you need to make it a little bit larger. So our organization was founded in 1978 with the mission to champion the restoration and protection of the Biona wetlands, involving and educating the public as advocates and stewards. And we've been working towards that goal ever since. Our founders, as Scott mentioned, were the original, created the original lawsuit that without that, none of this would have been possible. But before we get into the full-scale restoration project, I just want to mention some of our successes leading up till now. So in the 1990s, we started our original restoration program, bringing back the coastal sand dunes in the Ecological Reserve, which hadn't been an ecological reserve at this point. And here you can see the transition that we've created. With the assistance of hundreds of thousands of volunteers over 2 decades, we removed blankets of ice plants and weeds from 8 acres of dunes and brought back the federally endangered El Segundo blue butterfly, which is still endangered, but its range is expanding. And with restoration elsewhere, we are making inroads into bringing, hopefully one day, delisting this butterfly. We've also collected local seed and have been propagating its special plant, buckwheat. And in 2004, we worked with state and local governments and agencies to improve the tide gates on Biona Creek. The original tide gates were actually designed to drain the wetlands, but now they allow muted tidal flow. This critical stopgap measure brought back life to the salt marsh and increased habitat for the endangered Belding savanna sparrow. This cryptic bird, which you can just barely see in the pickleweed here, nests and forages in the salt marsh, which you can only find where there is tidal flow in Southern California. Then in 2008, we fought to create a 51-acre freshwater system that is adjacent to the Ecological Reserve. It was built and maintained in perpetuity at the expense of Playa Vista developers as part of our lawsuit. The 26-acre marsh and the 25-acre adjacent riparian corridor provide natural stormwater treatment and flood control, as well as habitat for more than 260 species of birds, including a number of rare and endangered birds, like this least bittern. All right, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Biona Wetlands Ecological Reserve Restoration Project. So California Fish and Wildlife has been working long and hard to finalize this plan. And again, we are not speaking on behalf of CDFW or the Army Corps. We are advocates for restoration. And everything presented here is substantiated by the EIR or other scientific sources. As members of the Wetlands Restoration Principles Coalition, we are advocating for a robust science-based restoration that meets the 9 restoration principles created by our coalition. And the other, many other highly respected organizations are pictured here, are also partners in advocating for this restoration. During this presentation, we'll discuss why wetlands are important, provide an overview of the history of the Biona wetlands and how it's been impacted, and we'll describe the project goals and the outcomes. Lastly, we want to give some restoration examples, and there's also a handout that describes some of these so that you can see how some of these things have worked out. And then we'll, of course, answer your questions. Oh, we're going to kick things off with a poll. Why are wetlands important? Oh, sorry, here we go, launching poll. Be sure to click all that apply. All right, 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close it up, see how we did. All right, pretty good. So they absolutely provide habitat for wildlife. They clean our water and create oxygen. They sequester carbon and fight climate change, and they also control flooding from storms. My one trick answer in there was that they have water all year long. That's actually not true of all wetlands. Some wetlands only have water part of the year. Some wetlands are only flooded up to the surface. You may not even be able to tell if they're wetlands when you visit them. They're saturated below the surface of the soil. So there's so many different kinds of wetlands, it'll blow your socks off. So you listed all the other reasons, many of the reasons why wetlands are important. Some other reasons include their economic benefits, providing recreational and cultural opportunities, renewable resources and nurseries for fish, and educational opportunities, which of course is super important to us here at Friends of Biona Wetlands. Unfortunately, wetlands have been lost in staggering amounts across the country, and especially in Southern California, where 95% of wetlands have been lost. The Biona wetlands themselves have been greatly reduced in size due to development and degradation. They once spanned over 2,000 acres, and the protection of the Biona wetlands as an ecological reserve is a success story in saving 577 acres of open space. As the only coastal wetland left in the city of Los Angeles and one of the few remaining in the Santa Monica Bay area, this area is critical to the region. For those that aren't familiar, there's a handout with a map. And over here is in West Area B is where we are doing our sand dune restoration. Over here is Marina del Rey. Area C is across Lincoln Boulevard. South Area B is over here next to the Biona Freshwater Marsh, which we described as already having been restored. And it is not part of the reserve. It is managed separately and owned by a different entity. So Biona's history is a long one, but in recent history, starting in 1984, Friends of Biona Wetlands was sued to prevent the remaining wetlands from being developed. As described, this battle was very long, but with the support of elected officials and the community, in 2003, the state acquired the land for $140 million with the purpose of protecting and restoring the wetlands. Planning and research for the restoration began soon after that, with the final environmental impact report being released in 2019 and certified in 2020. Now, since the certification has been completed, the EIS will be finalized by the Army Corps of Engineers and the permitting process will begin, followed by the restoration work itself, long-term monitoring, and maintaining the land. Here's an animation that takes us through Biona's transformation over the last several thousand years. As you can see, Biona has changed quite a lot, from an open bay to a partially closed tidal system. One of the biggest changes occurred just after a massive flood in the early 1800s, when the LA River was actually rerouted to where it is now in Long Beach. So prior to that flood, the LA River actually merged with Biona Creek and emptied into the Santa Monica Bay. So freshwater influence has been limited significantly after that time. and even more so after channelization, when the creeks in our city were cemented and straightened. And then even further in the 1900s, as urbanization took over much of the area. Here's a map of the Historic Biona Lagoon from 1876, which shows a mixture of vegetated salt and brackish marsh, salt pans, tidal channels, and open water. Inland from there were alkali meadows, wet meadows, and willow thickets. At this point in time, the LA River no longer flowed to Biona. Here are some historic photos showing the vegetation of the pickleweed tidal channels meandering through the area. This one shows a comparison of 1934 to 2017. This second image is just before Marina del Rey was developed in 1957. And for those that are familiar with the area, this little pond over here is known as now Mother's Beach. The Biona wetlands have suffered greatly over the years. And in the 1800s, farming began, hunting lodges and resorts and railroads were constructed. And then in the 1900s, Biona suffered more serious negative impacts from oil drilling, channelization of Biona Creek, which we mentioned, the dewatering of the wetlands, and which disconnected the water from the land, dredging and filling, and from the creation of Marina del Rey, which destroyed nearly half of the wetland system at that time, approximately 900 acres. And to make matters worse, the fill that was pulled out of the marina to dredge the marina was then dumped on the remaining wetlands, further disconnecting the land from the water and raising the land by 15 to 20 feet, burying historic wetland and promoting invasive species. Biona continues to suffer today from altered hydrology when the water flow was drastically changed due to channelization, bisection by roads, pollution from trash and contaminated water, as well as noise and light pollution from surrounding urbanization. Also, an onslaught of invasive vegetation and urban predators like cats and raccoons, which have imperiled wildlife populations. Sadly, the wetlands are not thriving, and numerous scientific studies have shown that conditions are actually getting worse. On that note, we're going to have our last poll. It's a short one. What is the biggest threat facing Biona today? All right, 5 more seconds. I'm closing the poll. Let's see the results. So almost a pretty even split here. So the correct answer was selected. Non-native invasive plants is the biggest threat to Biona today. And for the 15% that think the wetlands can be developed, I have great news for you. They can't be. We already won that fight. They are an ecological reserve. They can never be developed. So we can all feel good about that. And then also pollution is definitely a problem, but not the biggest threat facing Biona. So this map shows the transition that took place over 6 years as the invasive plants expanded their range in the reserve to dominate areas shown in orange and red. So here it is in 2007. And here it is in 2013. So those areas that are dominated in red and orange are large swaths of monocultures of weeds. And in 2020, the situation has become even worse in some areas. It's so extensive that it's going to take a massive effort to undo this damage, unlike the hand weeding that we've been doing in the dunes for the last 20 years. So let's take a look at Area A. Some degraded and isolated non-tidal salt marsh and coastal sage scrub persisted in Area A in the 1990s. However, in 2020, the former wetland areas are drying and disappearing, becoming almost unrecognizable under this invasive monocultures of weeds. There's actually a habitat map in your handouts that you can use to see the different habitats that are outlined throughout the area, if you're curious and digging in on that. Here's an aerial view. Many of the monocultures occur in the most isolated and fragmented areas with the most altered hydrology, like East Area B, which is trapped between two roads, Area A, which is bordered by roads and cement on all sides, and Area C, the most inland and disconnected area. These areas are overrun with invasive plants, like crown daisy, black mustard, euphorbia, and ice plant. These plants outcompete native plants and provide little or no resources for native wildlife populations. For example, 80% of caterpillars in our state depend completely on native plants, and caterpillars are an essential food source for birds raising chicks. So you can see how going up the line, everything can be affected. The Biona Wetlands Ecological Reserve is currently closed to the public, but could be a potential gem of a park with exceptional wildlife viewing and recreational and educational opportunities for the community that have very little access to the outdoors. Currently, the 3 organizations are permitted by CDFW to lead programs on the reserve, as mentioned by Scott earlier, but a full-scale restoration will open this up to the general public. A restored Biona will have high-quality habitat and a system of trails that will provide expanded educational programming and access that is critical open space for more than 15,000 disadvantaged households within biking distance and hundreds of thousands within driving distance. As you can see in this image, the area around Biona currently has a high park need, according to the LA County Park Needs Assessment. The areas in red have a high park need, and restoration of the wetlands could help address that. In fact, Westchester Playa del Rey area and LAX area are the most park poor neighborhoods of the West Side, with only 15% of the population within walking distance of a park. In general, green space has tons of benefits for the community, but it also increases property values for those that are living directly nearby and are considering how that will affect them. It also improves the health of folks who are living nearby, who benefit from having the green space and additional places to exercise and form community connections. So now that we've identified the many reasons why Biona needs a robust and science-based restoration, let's talk about the goals of the project. As an ecological reserve, the first and primary goal is to create high-quality habitat for wildlife by restoring Biona to a fully functioning, biologically diverse estuary. The second primary goal is to provide benefits to humans, such as beautiful views, recreational value, and a place to educate the next generation of environmental stewards. The EIR outlined 3 different project alternatives, ranging from the least to the most restoration. The selected project is Alternative 1, which is the most extensive restoration. This project also aligns with Governor Newsom's plan to protect 30% of lands and coastal waters by 2030. Alternative 1 also creates and enhances the largest wetland acreage, making Biona climate resilient and accessible to all Angelenos. It proceeds in 2 major phases with additional phasing throughout. The project will restore native habitat for wildlife by replacing non-native invasive plants and by removing non-native invasive plants and replacing them with native plants, which are appropriate to the habitat types on site. This will increase breeding and foraging opportunities for native wildlife populations, especially for sensitive wildlife species, a few of which are pictured here. Species that previously called Biona home may be able to return, and species that are still hanging on will benefit from improved and expanded habitat. Endangered species habitat is protected to the greatest extent possible, and any habitat that is lost will be mitigated for and expanded elsewhere in the project. This project will reconnect the Biona estuary to its floodplain by removing the concrete levees and allowing water to flow naturally. This is critical as hydrology is the most important component of a wetland. This project will require the use of heavy machinery to undo the damage done by building Marina del Rey, specifically to remove cement levees, excavate excessive fill and sediment, and recreate tidal channels that have been filled. Essentially, we have to unbulldoze Biona. Construction will take place in phases to allow for wildlife to move to other areas. Biologists will oversee the work to reduce any impacts on wildlife. Machinery like this has been used successfully in countless other wetland restoration projects all over the country. This is not new, it's common practice. To fulfill the second primary goal of the project and expand trails, fulfill the second primary goal of the project, there will be a massive effort to expand the trail system within the reserve. That means miles of bike paths and pedestrian paths and increased educational opportunities for the public. These amenities will make the reserve wheelchair and stroller accessible and provide parking for visitors who live outside the immediate area, as well as bus parking for schools, which is obviously super important. Furthermore, CDFW wardens will patrol the well-regulated trails to reduce impacts and maintain safety. Paths near sensitive breeding areas may be closed part of the year to protect wildlife. Trails and bike paths will be placed primarily on the periphery of the reserve to minimize disturbance, and some areas will be left without trails entirely to provide visitor-free areas for wildlife. This alternative adds 3.6 miles of pedestrian and bike paths, 5.5 miles of pedestrian-only trails, and 2,000 feet of boardwalk that will allow you to get a closer look at the wetlands. SoCalGas operates a natural gas storage facility in Playa del Rey. Much of the storage is 6,000 feet below the wetlands, and there are currently monitoring wells and roads located all across the reserve. This project includes abandonment of all 16 wells within the reserve, including removal of related access roads and infrastructure, which planners fought hard to achieve. This is a huge win for Biona because SoCalGas owns the mineral rights under the wetlands and doesn't have to leave if they don't want to. Their decision allows CDFW to maximize wetland habitat acreage and connectivity in the restoration plan. The well abandonment process started in September 2020 with Viter 5 along Culver Boulevard, and as of last week was officially abandoned and the sound barriers were removed. So up to 6 monitoring wells may be re-drilled to maintain monitoring requirements, and these activities are managed by the California Public Utilities Commission and California Geologic Energy Management Division. These wells will be on SoCalGas's property only, so the reserve will now be free of all of those wells and infrastructure. And Friends of Biona Wetlands supports a rapid transition to renewable energy and the eventual closure of the Playa del Rey gas facility. The state can decide to close the facility at any time, regardless of any new infrastructure on SoCalGas's property. The project will allow Biona to adapt to sea level rise, and this is really important. As the ocean rises, marsh habitat will be able to transition to higher elevations after restoration. CDFW and the Army Corps of Engineers are collaborating to design earthen levees around the perimeter of the reserve that will maintain or increase flood capacity. This is critical to providing marsh habitat for the Belding savanna sparrow and other wetland-dependent species into the future. If Biona cannot adapt to sea level rise, their habitat will be lost. At this time, if nothing is done, the wetlands will become a stagnant pond by around 2050, and the wetland habitat will not be able to survive. Restoration will help solve this problem. Here's an illustration that presents a rough idea of how the earthen levees will look. With this project, we're actually trying to fight the 6th mass extinction, and we are fighting for the Belding savanna sparrows with this project. The Southern California Wetlands Recovery Project Regional Strategy report from 2018 identifies the Santa Monica subregion as having the lowest opportunity for preserving wetlands in the face of climate change and sea level rise. And this is due to habitat loss and surrounding urbanization. Therefore, Biona being the only large wetland area other than Malibu Lagoon in this area, is critical to providing any wetland coastal resilience. Furthermore, adaptive management will allow the wetlands to adapt to sea level rise further. Without these changes, the wetlands again will lose their vital habitat for the endangered species that rely on salt marsh wetlands. Storing carbon in the soil is a natural process of wetlands. In fact, studies show that the rate of carbon sequestration in coastal wetlands is greater than in all terrestrial forests combined, despite forests covering a much larger area. So yes, wetlands are better than trees at sequestering carbon. And the Climate Reality Project explains that coastal habitat restoration alone could mitigate for the emissions from 5 million cars, and that reconnecting coastal marshes to their respective bodies of water could eliminate 1/3 of global methane emissions. In the United States, roughly 27% of salt marshes are disconnected from the ocean and prone to freshwater inundation, which releases methane, a dangerous greenhouse gas. Ramsar International Convention on Wetlands explains that restored coastal marshes begin accumulating carbon almost immediately, at rates equivalent to natural reference sites. This restoration project was not specifically designed as a carbon sequestration project, but it does have a co-benefit of sequestering increased amounts of carbon in perpetuity as the wetlands mature. And Ballona will be part of a network of wetlands up and down the coast and across the globe that will play a vital role in fighting sea level rise and sequestering blue carbon. Of course, all of this will lead to some temporary impacts. We have a lot to do, but all of those impacts will be mitigated and to reduce disturbance on the community. Some of these things include sound barriers, dust reduction using water, traffic planning, so trucks are only allowed to operate during certain hours of the day. There's going to be 2 bridges built to make sure that most of the activity takes place on site. So there's all kinds of efforts being taken to reduce the impact on the local community. So let's see some visualizations of what we're hoping Ballona will look like after restoration. So here's what Area A looks like from this particular angle. The restoration will breach the levees, lower the elevation, create tidal channels, restore native wetland plants, and add pedestrian boardwalks. So that's a big change there. Here is East Area B, where the bridges will be built to move dirt within the project. After that, they will be repurposed into bike paths, and non-native plants will be replaced with native plants. Here is Area B South, where additional channels will be added to restore more natural hydrology. The tide will remain muted rather than full, and the freshwater marsh adjacent to the reserve will allow excess water to spill over and create brackish marsh habitat. Here is Area C North. The view now is mostly of dead weeds throughout the year, but restoration will replace non-native weeds with beautiful native plants and walking trails. Any hills will be set far back from the buildings to preserve aesthetics. This is a panoramic transition of the Ballona freshwater marsh, which was created using heavy machinery in a former lima bean field, and has been transformed into one of the top birding hotspots in Los Angeles County. With more than 260 species seen since restoration began in 2003. Restoration takes time, but as the marsh matures, new species arrive and some stay to breed at the marsh, including special status species such as the least bell's vireo that was brought back to Ballona by the creation of the riparian corridor adjacent to the marsh. Numerous successful restoration projects across California are highlighted on the Wetlands Restoration Principles Coalition website, wetlandrestoration.org, including SoCal gas projects like Malibu Lagoon, Bolsa Chica Wetlands, and the San Alejo Lagoon, as well as Northern California projects like San Pablo Bay, and the largest tidal wetland restoration project on the West Coast, the South Bay Salt Ponds restoration. Here's a transition of the San Diego Lagoon near San Diego. I know it looks shocking, but when you bring back the natural hydrology and the appropriate plants, the results are astounding. Here's an example of Malibu Lagoon, which is one of our local wetlands. Prior to restoration, it had very low California Rapid Assessment wetland scores. And just in 2012, before restoration, here's the image here. And here is the transition as it's being restored. And this is an after image in 2018 when it had very high wetland scores. These scores are actually similar to completely undisturbed sites in other parts of the state. So it has, at this point, met or exceeded all of its success criteria in just 6 years. So a huge success story up in Malibu. In summary, the Biona Wetlands Ecological Reserve will benefit greatly from improved habitats and biodiversity, as well as increased public access and safety patrols, enhanced climate change resiliency, scenic beauty, and protections for endangered species. To make this happen, we need all of your support. If you belong to an organization that would like to support wetland restoration, you can join our coalition at wetlandsrestoration.org. As an organization or an individual, you can sign our support letter at bionafriends.org/support. You can reach out to all of your elected representatives and tell them to support the project. You can donate or volunteer to environmental organizations that are supporting wetland restoration, and you can help spread this wonderful factual information, including a brand new infographic that we have finished today that we're going to share a link to you in the chat box shortly. Thank you for listening to this very long-winded presentation. And yeah, thanks so much for coming. And we're going to get into your questions now.
Thank you, Nessa. That was wonderful. Lots of great information. I hope that everyone learned things. We already have some questions in. And I'm going to start cycling through the questions. Brody, I don't know if your camera is working now, but if you could log on, now's the time to do it. Nessa, people are saying thank you to you. I'm going to be the disembodied voice here and go away because you want to see these guys. And if you have more questions, just put them in, but I'm going to get started and read the questions now. Let's start with public access, at least the first couple of questions that we have here. Can civilians visit Biona to watch birds, for instance? Brody?
Yes, along the existing bike path on the North Levee and through managed access with the Friends of Biona and Audubon after the pandemic, we start touring again, absolutely.
Great, thanks, Brody. And what's the timeline in terms of opening up additional public access?
Well, fortunately,
and I know that's a tough question, so I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. Fortunately, when we acquired the land, we were able to implement an early access plan and open up an area in West Area B that the Friends of Biona and Audubon both conduct tours. I think close to 10,000 school children a year go through there. But the goal for the larger restoration is to have significantly more access and a lot of perimeter viewing of wildlife, boardwalk, but that timeline would coincide with the larger restoration.
Okay.
But like I said, I'm happy to report that we were able to open up the functioning part of the wetlands early on, and different than a lot of our other ecological reserves provide access to the public.
Great, thanks, Brody. Let's pose a couple of questions here about plant species. Are non-native plant, this is a really interesting question. Are non-native plant species always an issue? I know from other sensitive areas, for example, Chesapeake Bay, that controlled invasive species have been beneficial in some circumstances.
Well, one example at Biona is we have a eucalyptus stand that provides overwintering habitat for monarch butterfly, and that's planned to persist post-restoration because it offers benefits to native and threatened species. But in a lot of cases at Biona, with the acres and hundreds of acres of mustard and crown daisy, it's not providing the type of habitat that native species can provide for species that are on the brink of existence.
Great, thank you. So there will be some soil disturbance during the restoration process. Will that create more opportunities for invasive plant species? And I think the question is relates particularly to Area A, where there will be that dredge fill removal.
Well, typically disturbed soils are an opportunity for non-native plants to colonize, but this is a managed restoration. So once we disturb the soils, we want to make sure that the soils are in the condition to promote native growth and bring in the proper hydrology so that the non-natives are commanding the resource.
Okay, great. I'm going to give this is Nessa. This is one of Nessa's pet peeves. How do you get rid of cats and raccoons? And I'm saying that to a cat lover. So,
how do you get rid of cats and raccoons? Well, we do have urban constraints all around the perimeter of the reserve, and feral cats have been a problem to nesting birds. Managing for that is something we'll have to keep a close eye on in the restoration, but I think that's been more in the upland areas. When we have more wetlands, I don't think feral cats are going to be as much of a problem, but yeah, that's something we definitely, as the land manager, we're going to have to implement some sort of invasive species controls and use some of our success stories from our other reserves as examples.
Okay.
Yeah, especially including having the buffer zones so that there's more vegetated habitat between the urban areas and the high quality wetland areas, having improved hydrology, having dense native plant habitat that's resistant to the invasive species that allow the raccoons and cats to more easily access those areas. So it's all about building a self-sustaining system that is able to resist those invasive predators and plants.
But while we're on this subject, if we have folks on this call that are residents of the surrounding area of the reserve, education is one of our best tools. You know, please don't let your cats run wild in the reserve.
Absolutely.
Talk to your neighbors.
Yeah, keep your cats indoors. They also make little bibs for cats. If your cat is an indoor-outdoor cat, you can put a little bib on them and it'll stop them from hunting the native birds. So there are some creative ways to deal with that. And then working with the urban interface and partnering with the businesses that are right next to the reserve to make sure that the trash cans are locked and closed so that they're not attracting raccoons and other pests is definitely something that could be done as well.
And the businesses don't use rodenticides that have secondary kill for the creatures that live in the reserve.
Hey, Brody, a quick follow-up question about the eucalyptus grove that you mentioned. How will that be protected and preserved during the restoration?
So the eucalyptus grove is in South Area B. We do plan to improve the tidal circulation out in that area to kind of breathe some life back into the pickleweed that's starved for hydrology in that area. But keeping the channels far enough from the eucalyptus grove would be critical, and monitoring that to make sure that the eucalyptus aren't impacted. They are adjacent to some tidal channels right now, so they seem to be persistent. They seem to be acclimated to that, but We have tidal channels that are about 400 feet away from the willows in West Area B, and we're using that as a metric of how close the tidal channels should be brought to areas that rely more on freshwater, willows, possibly the eucalyptus, to make sure those habitats persist.
Okay, great. We question about, okay, another question about the animals. What are some of the other birds that folks will see when they're in the reserve now, and what birds do you think that we'll see post restoration that will return as a result?
Well, necessary, but you know, wouldn't that be great if we started seeing light-footed clapper rail back in the Southeast Area B? A lot more beldings would be spectacular, and really what you see now, a lot more of that, really an abundance of birds. This is on the Pacific Flyway, and we expect to see tens of thousands of birds at any particular time of the year, which we don't see in the upland fill now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Ridgeways rail especially would be a true delight. We definitely want to be creating more habitat for endangered species that are going to be losing these habitats more as the sea level rises. But we're also going to be seeing a lot more of some of the birds that you can see right now, riparian dependent birds. So some of these things you can actually come out and see and take a birding tour with us once COVID restrictions have lifted, and that maybe these species are a little bit more rare right now, but after restoration, they'll be more visible for folks.
Great,
but
thank
we
you.
still have quite a bit of diversity right now, which is lucky.
A lot more shorebirds, a lot more waterfowl.
Great. What efforts are going to be made to reduce disturbance to animals and birds and invertebrates, et cetera, during the restoration?
Wait, say that one more time.
So what efforts are going to be made to reduce disturbance to native wildlife during the restoration when we're using machinery?
So I don't expect the people on this call have had a chance to read the EIR in any length. It's quite a document, but the mitigation measures are thorough, and protecting species that we're trying to preserve and expand habitat for is the utmost focus. There will be common species that will be displaced. Some might even be harmed, but the mission of the department at this point is to expand habitat for species that are clinging to existence in the region. Invertebrates, again, some will probably be displaced. We have the federally endangered El Segundo blue butterfly that won't be impacted directly, and the Friends are doing great work to expand its habitat. I mean, that's a more detailed discussion where you go species by species, but each species that we're trying to protect and expand habitat for, the mitigation measures and protection and avoidance and minimization measures are all detailed in the EIR. It's the department's mission to protect and expand habitat for these species.
Great, thank you. Another question about animals is what animals would be natural predators that might be reintroduced into the wetlands?
That would be natural predators. I don't think we're planning on reintroducing any natural predators. We do have coyotes that are using the Biona Creek as a wildlife corridor right now. I think their persistence is expected. But you know, any questions that I can't answer to your satisfaction, but you want more detail on, we definitely can get experts from our wildlife branch to go into more detail, but I don't think there's plans to reintroduce any natural predators.
Yeah, for example, we're a little too isolated where we are for mountain lions to be able to reach Biona, right? But definitely the coyotes are persistent. We see them out there fairly regularly. We have also hawks and falcons and other birds of prey that are currently at Biona and will also benefit from improved habitat after restoration. But most of
I'd love to see an osprey platform. We mentioned that in the EIR. That's a natural predator for more marine habitats. But wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a new osprey platform up at LMU that we hope someday will get used, and then maybe we can continue to expand habitat for those guys.
Okay, here's a question, going back to public access. Someone's asking about the Fiji Way Wetlands, which I assume they're talking about Area A. Will that be opened up?
So Area A is ground zero for restoration. That's our largest opportunity. That's about 140 acres of wetland restoration. So that's a big yes. I mean, there'll be a perimeter bike path. We have a boardwalk plan for that area. And that's going to be, like I said, the largest contiguous habitat, wetland habitat restoration. So yes, it would be absolutely incumbent on us to make sure that people utilize that as an educational opportunity, and bike path, pedestrian paths separated from the bike path for a feeling of solitude, and turnouts, viewing platforms, all that.
Great, thank you. Let's move into some questions about the restoration. How much of an uphill battle are we fighting since the Marina Del Rey dump took place?
Well, one of the slides Nessa presented, or it was actually the poll, they talked about what are the greatest pressures on the reserve, and we spoke about non-native plants, and I would argue that the lack of hydrology is probably real high on that list. That's the number one pressure we face when they basically filled 140 acres with the marine dredge. And so there's a wetland underneath there somewhere. And that's 3 million cubic yards of fill. And if you can imagine that, that's a yard by Mobile, Alabama worth of fill that needs to be removed out of there. A lot of that will be repositioned as perimeter levees, but moving that amount of fill is a large scale restoration for sure.
We have several questions from a lot of folks, like timeline. What's the next step, and when do we think that the restoration will be completed?
When the restoration,
I know that's a big question.
So we just certified the EIR. We still need to get a EIS. It's not certified, it's approved by the Army Corps of Engineers. So all I can say now at this point is we've said for the last several months, we're looking at 2.5 to 3 years moving through the Army Corps process and other permitting processes to try and get this project shovel ready. But to be honest, the Army Corps will be driving this timeline, and we'll be working close with them to try and be as efficient as possible.
Okay. By the way, there were a couple of questions from folks about will this presentation be recorded and available at another time, and we will make that available to folks, and we'll let you know how to access that.
Can I just make one note that when you introduced me as a land manager and playing a quote major role in the EIR, humbly, I'd just like to say that as a land manager, I did have input in the EIR, but we had a really great team of the state's best wetland scientists driving this planning effort for sure.
Great, thanks, Brody. You still look really hard. Regarding Area C, the EIR states that elevations will increase by 15 to 30 feet. The after restoration picture that was presented does not reflect this. Can a 3D model be developed to give an accurate impact that the dumping of so much material in Area C? I think that what that question doesn't take into account is how high the area is already in terms of sea level.
I'm trying to get to the point of the question.
The question is, folks the question about Area C is that the EIR states that the elevation will be increased 15 to 30 feet. Is that still, does that still apply?
Okay. And
do we have a more, the question was that our after picture, the questioner doesn't feel that accurately represents what the area is going to look like.
I think the visual simulation is pretty accurate. You can see that the view will change from the Via Marina apartments for sure. But we got comments from quite a few residents of the Via Marina apartments that did not like the elevation change in that area, and we appreciated those comments, and we've incorporated those comments into future planning. And we mentioned in the final project description that we will reserve the option of changing fill placement. Balancing fill on site may not have to be so much in that area. We could reposition it in other parts of the reserve or truck it off, but we're still working towards final design.
Great, thank you.
Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Okay, you know, and folks, if anyone has follow-up questions and we don't get to them here today for some reason, because we have still a lot of questions to go, or you don't feel like that we fully, just email us info@BallonaFriends.org, and we'll make sure that we respond to your questions. Next question is.
Oh, sorry. There was an earlier question about impacts to species and how can we protect them. It's the department's goal to phase the project in steps so that we can minimize the impacts and control the impacts to species as we go along.
Okay. This is a question I'd actually like to hear this from both of you, because there have been a couple of people, or actually several people have asked this question. What are the potential impacts if we do nothing? If we just leave it as it is, what happens?
So Nessa showed a slide that showed from 2007 to 2013, the change in spread of non-native species, and that's due mainly because of the lack of hydrology. And when the reserve was originally filled with marine sediments, salty enough to mimic wetland environment, we got some pickleweed, but that's all been pushed away as salts leach out of the soil, and now we have these upland invasive species taking over. And there was a portion of her slide that showed where areas actually improved, where we improved the hydrology. So wait, I lost track of the question. So what if we do nothing?
What happens?
Yeah, what if we do nothing? So our continued studies show that doing nothing will end up with more non-native species invasion and less wetlands. And we'll be tracking that over time to make sure that is fact, but that's what the science is showing. Doing nothing is not a gentle hands-off approach. Doing nothing is continued decline. That's the way things are looking.
Yes, I know you have some very strong feelings about this.
Doing nothing will also mean that by 2050, the wetlands that are currently have some water and have that higher quality pickleweed habitat that Brody mentioned in the map, where they have been getting tidal flow and they've been able to, that area has been able to improve. between 2007 and 2013. That will then become a flooded, stagnant pond. As the sea level rises, the tide gates can no longer allow flushing in and out of water. They will be permanently shut, and we're just going to have a wet, stagnant mess.
So sea level rise projections do show that our tide gate should eventually become non-functional, and the small area, you know, we call it the Biona wetlands, but only about 10% of it is functioning as a wetland, and we stand a chance of losing that with sea level rise if we don't start planning and implementing restoration to plan for that.
Okay. Where will the soil excavated from Area A be disposed of?
Well, much of that soil is going to be repositioned as the perimeter levees, but we have quite a bit to deal with. So we're talking about balancing some of that fill in Area C, north and south. That's what one of the questions addressed earlier. A lot of it's going to be trucked off. We do have an option in the EIR where we explore offshore disposal. It needs one more layer of testing, but it seems to be pretty clean marine sediments that can be shipped offshore to one or two EPA approved offshore disposal sites. But we're looking at trucking a lot of it out of there. That we cannot use in the levees or we can't reposition in Area C. Well, should we give it back to the Marina?
No. What are some, will the riparian habitat in West Area B be impacted?
No, that's precious habitat to be preserved and expanded where possible.
What do you think is going to be the hardest part during the restoration?
Upland restoration is the trickiest. Wetland restoration seems to be a little more forgiving because it's kind of a just add water principle. But yeah, I think the upland restoration is going to take a lot of maintenance, a lot of TLC.
Okay. So we're running really long here. I'm trying to organize a couple of questions about use of the creek. Well, it's currently used for rowing by a couple of university clubs. Will the club still be able to use that?
I think that they need 2,000 linear feet. I think they're going to lose a portion of that. So for competitive, I'm not a rower, so but I think for competition, it's not going to be available. They do use the marina for training. They could continue to use what portion of the creek is available for training or other resources in the area.
Great. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. Some great questions about the wetlands being an ancestral site for the Tongva, and how during the restoration will the cultural sites be protected, and are the Gabrielino Tongva being consulted in the process?
Our partnership with Native American tribes is utmost, and communication with them is ongoing. We need a little bit more study to know exactly what's going on, but what we know will be protected. The most important sites, we don't plan to disturb at all. Archaeological monitors will be on site throughout the restoration. So I'm not sure what more to add to that. It's probably top of the list of priorities of avoidance and minimization, and having archaeological monitors and Native American partners throughout the process.
Okay, great. Nessa, you want to let folks know how they can help out and make this happen?
Yeah, so as Brody mentioned, the project has been approved, but doesn't have the final permitting, and all of the funds haven't been fully allocated yet. So there's still some steps that agencies and elected officials will be taking to push this project into the implementation phase. And that's why it's really important that the community continue to show their adamant support for this project so that it doesn't get forgotten. We want to make sure it moves on as quickly as possible. So reaching out to your elected officials and encouraging them to push for allocation and securing of funding and permits to get the agencies on board as quickly as possible and move this along. You can add your name to our support letter, bionafriends.org/support, and you can reach out to all of your elected officials on our bionafriends.org/restoring-Biona page. There's our brand new infographic, which you can use to share with friends and family and anybody that you can reach out to share the facts about the project and why it's important, and also encourage those folks to sign on to the restoration support letter so we can make sure that all of our elected officials know that this is a priority for our state and our community, and we want to make sure that this moves ahead quickly.
And I would like to thank the Friends of Biona for having the Department of Fish and Wildlife be a part of the question and answer session of this presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here, Brody. We really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Okay. Can we just get there are a couple of questions that we probably should address, and that's that there are a couple of lawsuits that are being filed against the EIR. What's the lawsuit? And you're probably limited in terms of what you can talk about because there is ongoing litigation. But was there a specific complaint? I don't know if you can answer this, Brody. So I'm sorry if you can't.
You're right. It's as simple as the department has a policy to not comment on ongoing litigation. So we just have to leave it at that. I apologize if it's not enough for others.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have set that up better.
It's fair enough to ask it. There is litigation, but we just can't comment on it.
Okay. If the person who asked the question wants to contact me directly, because I'm not involved in litigation, I can sort of give you our version of it. So they ask a question about what donations are spent on, and I think that refers specifically to the Friends as a 501c3 nonprofit. We do operate on a donation-only basis, and that funding operates our Explore Biona education program that, as I mentioned earlier, where we see about several thousand students every year in our K through 12 program, and our restoration program enhances and restores the Biona wetlands. So that's where donations to us go. For the person who has a question about graduate students in universities and organizations to volunteer, other than going to the website, if you will just email me, I'll be happy to give you more information. Okay, we're way running out of time, and we've spending too much time on this. But another question, NASA, will disadvantaged communities be able to benefit from the project even if they aren't close?
Thank you. I was reading that one, and that's the one I wanted to answer. Absolutely. This is really important. The restored Biona wetlands will be the closest thing that folks in Los Angeles can see in terms of a high functioning estuary, and having parking facilities designated for folks visiting the Ecological Reserve is critical. So folks who do live far enough away and have to drive, they can't bike, they can't walk, this is for all zip codes in Los Angeles. So it will be absolutely important for them to be able to come and visit the wetlands whenever they are available. Making it open to the public is a critical component of this project. Having an ecological reserve in the heart of Los Angeles means you have to make it accessible to the people who live in Los Angeles. And that's really important. So absolutely, the disadvantaged communities will have this be a shining beacon for future generations. And also our educational programs bring folks from schools throughout Los Angeles, providing bus scholarships to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to come to Biona.
Can I just add that the department's aware that the Friends of Biona do reach out to thousands of Title I students a year, and I'm really looking forward to getting tours going again, and that equity and inclusivity is absolutely the top of the list for the department too. We appreciate all the work you're doing.
Okay. There were a couple of questions about the homeless situation. Brody, how will, once the restoration, well, how are you managing the homeless situation now, and how will it be managed better in the process? The other question that I'll answer quickly is, how about the homeless and RV situation at the Freshwater Marsh? Those RVs are parked on city streets. The mayor issued a moratorium on towing RVs during the COVID crisis. So those folks are there. There's some bad actors. There's some not great stuff going on. I'll be honest, the city hasn't been particularly helpful in helping us clean the situation up. I would urge you to please write the city council person, Mike Bonnen's office, or email me directly. We have little to no control over the city streets. There is no overnight parking now. We need enforcement. These folks are destroying some really valuable habitat, and it's a problem. Anyway, Brody, the question back to you is, how will you manage the homeless situation moving forward?
Well, much like we're doing now, our team has been working daily out there for years to evict illegal activities in the reserve and educate illegal campers that it's an ecological reserve, clean up some of the messes left behind, and restore some of the habitat degradation that's happened, and we'll continue that process in perpetuity.
Yeah,
I think though restoring wetlands will go a long ways. Most of our camps tend to be in these upland areas.
Great. There was another question about access and will there be a charge for parking? I don't, Brody, as far as I know, the parking lot in by West Area B and Playa Vista, it will not be a charge for parking, or do you know yet?
Not that I know of. I don't think we charge at Bolsa Chica, the Newport Back Bay. Not that I know of. There's no plan for charging. Don't hold my word to it. These are Sacramento policies, but I'm not aware of any plan to charge for parking for visitors to the Ecological Reserve. We want to make it easy access.
Yeah, I just have to say that in the original EIR, there was going to be a parking lot in Area A along Fiji, a small. I think the design was a little too large for the scale, but to have a small parking lot or a small parking facility there was removed, and I just have to say that the Friends are very disappointed that parking facility was removed. You can't say that you're opening up for access when we don't have good people moving in Los Angeles. The buses don't run nearby. If you want people to visit the wetlands, you can't invite a family from another region of Los Angeles if there's no place to park. So we hope that at some point in time that the state will reconsider that, and we really don't understand why that was removed. And I'm not even asking you to respond to that.
Okay. Well,
that was my editorial.
Okay.
I see a question about the interceptor. So there's been some plans to try to create a trash collector and place it in the creek. And this would be done upstream of the Ecological Reserve, I believe is the current plan. It hasn't been finalized. So it would prevent trash ideally from entering the wetlands. That's the goal of the project.
Well, right now there's a trash boom. It's not upstream of the reserve. It's upstream of the Culver Bridge. It's mid-reserve. The interceptor that's proposed, the pilot project is supposed to be downstream of the reserve, outside of the boundaries of the reserve. I thought that if the pilot project were successful, they were going to move it upstream of the reserve, but that's not what I'm hearing now. It would stay in place downstream of the reserve. But any trash interception is good trash interception. And then there's also the 3 low flow water quality projects that are being implemented now at Sentinel Creek and Sepulveda and upstream of us that are all going to go a long ways into meeting the TMDL standards and cleaning up water quality in the creek.
Great.
Okay. I think that's it.
That's it. We can go all night.
Yeah. Hold on. Yeah, that's it. Other than pending litigation that you can't talk about.
Yeah.
Did I miss something?
Oh, I was going to say some folks who may want to review the final designs of the project themselves, you can access that from the bionafriends.org/restoring-biona page. So it has the infographic that gives a good overview. There's also an overview document in the handouts attached here. But if you want to actually dive into the EIR itself, there's a link to the CDFW webpage so that if you want to go through the final EIR, read the executive summary and get all of that in-depth information, that's all absolutely available to you.
I hope this was helpful. Let's do this again.
Wonderful. That's a great note. We will be having this webinar again later in the spring. So if any folks that didn't get a chance to join us, but we will be sharing this webinar afterwards. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We appreciate you spending this extra time with us. And thank you so much, Brody, for taking the time.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, good night.
Bye. Thanks, Brody.
Good night.
Thank you, Nessa.